The crystal chandeliers of Summit Hall cast fractured light across a sea of alien dignitaries, and Dr. Salira Thinavar felt the weight of secrets pressing against her ribs like a physical thing. She stood near the western colonnade, one hand resting against the smooth organic wall that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, her other hand clutching a data tablet that contained orders she wished she'd never received. Around her, the galaxy's most powerful beings exchanged pleasantries in a dozen languages, filtered through translation matrices that hummed with quiet efficiency. The air smelled of exotic incense and something else, something distinctly human, that her Navari senses struggled to catalog. Sweat, perhaps. Anticipation. The scent of a species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer, bloody-minded determination. Salira's bioluminescent markings flickered amber against her deep blue skin, betraying the anxiety she fought to keep from her expression. 3 days ago, the High Council had summoned her to a private chamber and given her an assignment that made her stomach twist with something uncomfortably close to shame. Study them, High Scholar Vedran had said, his ancient eyes hard as stone. Find their weaknesses, catalog their vulnerabilities. The humans claim to be peaceful, but we need to know what lies beneath. She'd wanted to refuse. She'd wanted to tell them that science wasn't meant to be weaponized, that her life's work in genetic research was about understanding, not exploitation. But the council held her research grants, her laboratory access, her entire career in their perfectly optimized hands. So she'd taken the assignment and hated herself for it. Now, watching the human delegation move through the crowd with easy confidence, Salira wondered what kind of weaknesses the council expected her to find. The humans looked fragile compared to most species here. No natural armor plating, no enhanced musculature, no obvious biological advantages. Just soft skin and bright eyes and smiles that showed too many teeth. That was when she noticed him. The bodyguard stood at parade rest near the northern entrance, and everything about his posture screamed military precision. Where the other humans circulated and socialized, this one remained utterly still. His eyes in constant motion, cataloging threats with the kind of hypervigilance that spoke of hard experience and harder losses. Salira found herself studying him with professional interest. He was tall for his species, perhaps 1.9 meters, with a build that suggested significant time under heavy gravity. Dark hair cropped short in military fashion, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite, and eyes, pale gray eyes that missed nothing, sweeping the room in calculated patterns that her scientific mind recognized as optimized threat assessment. His tactical vest bore no obvious weapons, but she noted the way it hung slightly heavier on the left side, the subtle bulge near his shan that suggested concealed equipment. His hands, scarred and calloused, rested loose at his sides, ready for explosive movement. This was a man who had seen violence, who lived in its shadow, who carried it like a second skin. A name tag identified him as Garrett Thorne, United Earth Security. Salira activated her tablet's scanning function, running a discrete biosignature analysis. The readings made her frown. Elevated heart rate despite his calm exterior. Heightened adrenaline levels. Cortisol markers suggesting chronic stress. This wasn't just professional alertness. This was a man running on fumes, pushing through something that looked disturbingly like guilt. She filed that observation away, feeling another twist of shame at her own clinical detachment. He wasn't a research subject. He was a person currently protecting the human ambassador, who was even now shaking hands with Navari dignitaries, blissfully unaware that one of those dignitaries had been assigned to dissect his species' genetic code, looking for weaknesses. The thought made Salira's patterns dim with shame, and she forced herself to look away from the bodyguard, to focus on the ambient sounds of diplomatic conversation. But her eyes kept drifting back to him, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Professional curiosity, she told herself. Nothing more. Then their eyes met across the crowded hall. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in that brief connection, Salira felt something shift in her carefully ordered world. The bodyguard, Garrett Thorne, looked at her with an intensity that seemed to see straight through her scholar's robes to the guilt beneath. Not aggressive, not suspicious, just aware in a way that made her luminescence flare brighter before she could stop it. He gave her a slight nod, the kind of acknowledgement one professional gives another, and returned his attention to the crowd. But Salira stood frozen, her heart's hammering in a rhythm that had nothing to do with scientific detachment and everything to do with being seen, truly seen, by someone she was supposed to be cataloging as a potential threat. She was so distracted by the strange encounter that she almost missed the wrongness. Almost. But Celera hadn't earned the rank of high scholar through carelessness. Her mind trained to notice patterns and deviations registered the anomaly even as her conscious thoughts struggled to process the moment with Garrett Thorne. A serving attendant moving through the crowd, his gait just slightly too purposeful, his eyes locked on something with predatory focus. On her. The realization hit like ice water through her veins. The attendant was young, perhaps equivalent to 20 human years, with the distinctive markings of the lower castes. But his hands, those hands were wrong. Too steady, too controlled. The slight tremor most servers showed when navigating high caste gatherings was absent, replaced by the focused calm of someone with a singular purpose. Celera's hand moved toward the concealed alert device in her robes, but she was a scientist, not a soldier. Her reactions, optimized for laboratory precision, were far too slow for this moment. The attendant's hand emerged from his robes, gripping something that looked like a shard of living crystal, its surface crawling with violet luminescence that Celera's trained eye recognized with cold horror. Crathal toxin, extracted from the death blooms of the outer rim, fatal to most carbon-based species within minutes, and there was no known universal antidote. Time seemed to fracture into crystalline shards. The attendant's arm rose in an arc calculated for her exposed throat. Celera's muscles locked in atavistic fear, her genetic optimization suddenly useless against the primitive reality of violence. Around them, conversations continued in blissful ignorance, the galaxy's elite too absorbed in diplomacy to notice death moving through their midst. But someone noticed. Garrett Thorne crossed the 15 meters between them in what seemed like a single heartbeat. There was no shout of warning, no dramatic announcement, just explosive economical movement that spoke of 1,000 training repetitions drilled into muscle memory until thought became an action, became survival. He hit them both like a force of nature. Celera felt powerful arms wrap around her smaller frame, felt herself being rotated in midair as the bodyguard's body mass positioned itself between her and the descending blade. She caught a glimpse of his face, saw grim determination, and something else. Something that looked like quiet apology, as if he were sorry for the violence but not for the choice. Then they were falling, and the world exploded into chaos. The crystalline blade meant for Celera's throat punched through Garrett Thorne's tactical vest like tissue paper. The sound it made entering on flesh was wet and final, a meaty thunk that Celera would hear in her nightmares for months to come. The bodyguard's body went rigid against hers, every muscle locked in sudden agony, but his arms never loosened their protective cage around her. They hit the polished marble floor with brutal force. Garrett's back took the impact, cushioning her fall with his own body even as the blade bit deeper between his shoulder blades. Celera felt the breath drive from his lungs in a harsh grunt, felt the shudder of pain that racked through his frame. Then the alarms erupted. Summit Hall transformed from elegant gathering to controlled pandemonium in seconds. Security protocols engaged with mechanical precision. Navari guards swarmed from hidden positions, their weapons humming to life with barely contained energy. Delegates scattered, seeking cover or simply fleeing in primal terror. The translator matrices screamed warning in a cacophony of alien languages. And Celera, trapped beneath the weight of a dying human, watched violet poison spread across his back like spilled wine. She scrambled out from under him, her hands already moving to assess the damage, before conscious thought caught up with action. Garrett Thorne lay face down on the marble, his breath coming in short, controlled gasps that spoke of military discipline fighting against biological imperatives. The blade protruded from between his shoulder blades, and around the wound his skin was already discoloring with arterial patterns of violet and black. Crathal toxin worked fast, spreading through the cardiovascular system like liquid death, shutting down organ function with ruthless efficiency. Celera had seen it used in biological warfare research. Watched simulations of its effects on various species. 20 minutes from exposure to complete systemic collapse. Maybe less for humans whose physiology she didn't know well enough to calculate with precision. Navari security reached them, weapons trained on the now subdued assassin. Subcommander Corin Valth, his dark blue skin marked with the crimson patterns of combat readiness, took command with clipped efficiency. "Secure the High Scholar," he ordered, gesturing for two guards to move Celera away from the scene. No, the word came out sharper than she intended, but Celera was already on her knees beside the fallen bodyguard, her scientific mind racing through treatment protocols. Look at the wound discoloration. That's crathyl toxin. He has minutes, not hours. Corn's patterns pulsed with recognition and alarm. Then we need to get him to the medical center immediately. The public medical center isn't equipped for xenobiology at this level. Celira's hands moved over Garrett's back, checking pulse points, noting the rapid deterioration of cellular integrity around the wound site. Her fingers came away stained with blood that was already darkening to an unhealthy purple. By the time they synthesize an antivenom for human physiology, he'll be dead. High Scholar, the protocols. Protocols mean nothing if he dies in the next 20 minutes while we argue bureaucracy. Celira met Corin's eyes, her luminescence blazing with an intensity that surprised them both. I have a private laboratory with a full genomic sequencer and synthesis equipment. It's his only chance. The bodyguard stirred beneath her hands, and she felt rather than heard the soft groan of pain that he fought to suppress. His training was remarkable. Even dying, even in agony, he maintained tactical awareness. His eyes, those pale gray eyes, found hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Ma'am," he managed, his voice roughened by pain, but still carrying the cadence of military formality. "The ambassador, is she?" "She's safe." Celira didn't know if that was true, but she needed him focused on surviving, not on his mission. "You did your deed, now let me do mine." Something that might have been relief flickered across his face before pain claimed him again. Celira made her decision in that moment, knowing it would violate a dozen council protocols and probably destroy her carefully maintained political position. But looking at this man who had thrown himself between her and death without hesitation, who was now paying the price for his protection, she found she didn't care about protocols anymore. "Get him to my lab," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her rank. "Now." Corn hesitated for one more second, his tactical mind warring with protocol, then gestured for his team. "You heard the High Scholar. Move him carefully. That blade needs to stay in place until we have proper medical facilities." Strong hands lifted Garrett Thorne, multiple Navari guards supporting his weight, with surprising gentleness. The movement drove the blade deeper, and Celira saw the bodyguard's face go white with agony. His jaw clenched hard enough that she heard teeth grinding, but he made no sound, just endured the way she suspected he'd been trained to endure. "Stay with me," Celira commanded, moving beside the stretcher as they carried him through a side corridor she'd only used for private research transport. That's an order, bodyguard. Despite everything, despite the poison spreading through his system and the blade buried in his back, Garrett Thorne's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, his voice already growing distant. "Orders? Received." The corridor blurred past in a rush of organic architecture and pulsing lights. Celira kept one hand on his wrist, monitoring his pulse, feeling the way his heart rate was climbing toward dangerous levels as his body tried desperately to compensate for the toxin's effects. His skin was growing hot beneath her fingers, fever spiking as his immune system mounted a futile defense. They reached the private lift that descended to her research facility, a space the council had granted her for genetic studies that were meant to advance Navari understanding of alien biology. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been given these resources to find weaknesses, and now she was using them to save a life. The lift dropped with stomach-churning speed, plunging them deep beneath the summit complex into levels that few outside the scientific community even knew existed. Celira watched Garrett's face the whole way down, watched consciousness slip further and further away despite his obvious efforts to maintain awareness. "Don't you dare die on me," she said quietly, meant only for him. "I haven't even properly thanked you yet." His eyes found hers one more time, and she saw something in them that made her heart ache. Not fear, not even pain, really. Just a kind of weary resignation, as if he'd been expecting this moment for a long time, and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "Don't," Celira said more firmly. "Whatever you're thinking, stop it. You're going to survive this." The lift doors opened onto her laboratory, a vast space filled with cutting-edge equipment that represented decades of Navari advancement in genetic sciences. Bioscanning arrays that could map a genome down to individual base pairs. Synthesis chambers capable of creating custom pharmaceutical compounds. Medical platforms equipped with every diagnostic tool necessary for studying alien physiology. "Get him on the primary platform," Celira directed, already moving to activate the systems. Holographic displays bloomed to life around her, filling the air with streams of data and diagnostic readouts. I need a full cellular analysis, toxin progression mapping, and cardiovascular integrity assessment. Now, the guards positioned Garrett on the platform with careful precision, then stepped back looking uncertain. This was outside their training parameters. Salira barely noticed their discomfort. Her entire focus had narrowed to the dying human on her examination table and the impossible task of saving him. "All of you out," she ordered, pulling up the scanning interface. "Security protocols, medical privacy, I don't care what justification you need. Leave." Corin moved to protest, but something in Salira's expression stopped him. "We'll be stationed outside," he said carefully. "If you need anything, I'll need you to not disturb me for the next several hours." Salira met his eyes with steely determination. "This man took a blade meant for me. I will not let him die because of bureaucratic oversight." "Understood." The sub-commander nodded slowly, then gestured for his team to withdraw. The laboratory doors sealed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving Salira alone with her patient and her conscience. She moved to Garrett's side, her hands already working to remove his tactical vest. The garment was sophisticated human engineering layers of ballistic protection that had proven utterly useless against a weapon designed to pierce much harder materials. As she peeled away the layers, she noted the scars beneath. Old wounds, some surgical, some from combat. This was a body that had endured violence before that bore the marks of survival. The blade removal would have to wait until she understood his physiology better. One wrong move could sever critical vessels or drive toxin deeper into vital organs. Instead, she focused on the scan, watching as the diagnostic array descended from above on articulated arms. "This is going to feel strange," she told him, not sure if he could still hear her, but needing to maintain the connection, the humanity of the moment. "Like warm water flowing through your bones. Try to stay still." The scanner activated with a soft hum, rings of silver metal, spinning slowly as they mapped every cell, every molecule, every strand of genetic code that made Garrett Thorne who and what he was. Salira moved to the holographic display, her hands dancing through layers of data as the system compiled its analysis. What she saw made her freeze in place, her bioluminescence pulsing with shocked disbelief. The human genome spread out before her in three-dimensional glory, a double helix of staggering complexity. But it was wrong. No, not wrong. Impossible. Sections of his DNA glowed with active transcription that defied every principle of evolutionary biology she'd studied. Massive genomic sequences that should have been dormant, relegated to the junk DNA that accumulated over evolutionary timescales, were instead blazing with activity, and they were rewriting themselves. Salira zoomed in on the active regions, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. These weren't random mutations. The patterns were too perfect, too intentional. Someone had written code into the human genome, sophisticated biological programming that lay dormant until triggered by exactly the kind of stress Garrett Thorne was experiencing now. "This can't be right," she whispered to the empty laboratory, pulling up comparison analyses from the Navari biological database. Every known species had genetic variation, evolutionary adaptations, biological quirks. But this was design. Engineering on a scale that suggested technological advancement far beyond anything the current galactic community possessed. She accessed the classified files, the ones the Council had granted her clearance to review as part of her assignment. And they're buried in layers of security protocols and marked with warnings about dissemination. She found it. Project designation, Berserker Protocol, species Homo sapiens, threat level existential. Salira's hands trembled as she opened the file-reading analysis that had been compiled decades ago when humanity first made contact with the Navari. Xenobiologists had performed preliminary genetic scans looking for compatibility markers, assessing potential for integration into galactic society. Instead, they had found something that terrified them. The file documented massive genomic instability in human DNA sequences that appeared to be artificial modifications rather than natural evolution. But more disturbing were the behavioral observations. Humans didn't respond to pain the way other species did. They didn't retreat from damage, didn't enter shock states designed to preserve life through withdrawal. Instead, they got angry. Pain triggered aggression. Injury sparked determination. Damage fueled an almost pathological refusal to surrender. The xenobiologists had documented cases throughout human history of individuals fighting on through wounds that should have been immediately fatal, of soldiers continuing to engage enemies while missing limbs, of civilians performing superhuman feats when protecting loved ones. It wasn't courage, it wasn't willpower, it was genetic programming. The Berserker Protocol, as the researchers had designated it, was a sophisticated system of biological triggers that transformed the human body into a combat engine when pushed to extremes. Adrenal glands that could flood the system with performance-enhancing hormones. Pain receptors that could be overridden by endorphins and compounds the file couldn't even properly identify. Muscle structures capable of temporarily exceeding their normal limitations at the cost of long-term damage. A species engineered for war. The file concluded with a recommendation that had been marked with the highest security classification. Human integration should proceed with extreme caution. Consider full genetic suppression protocols or isolated colony establishment. Under no circumstances should the full extent of the Berserker Protocol be revealed to the general population or to humanity itself. Celera felt cold horror spreading through her chest. The Council had known. For 30 years, they'd known that humanity was a biological weapon system wrapped in flesh and good intentions. And they'd suppressed it, buried it, hidden the truth, while building diplomatic relations based on a foundation of lies. And now she was watching it activate in real time. The toxin wasn't killing Garrett Thorne, it was triggering him. She pulled up the current scan results, comparing them to the baseline human data in the restricted files. The dormant sequences were fully active now, transcribing proteins she'd never seen before, flooding his system with chemical compounds that had no business existing in nature. His muscle density was increasing by measurable percentages even as she watched. Neural pathways were strengthening, optimizing for faster reaction times. His cardiovascular system was restructuring itself to handle increased demands. He was transforming. And it was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Celera's scientific mind raced through the implications. If the Berserker Protocol was designed to activate under stress, to turn humans into living weapons when threatened, then what would happen when it reached full activation? The file had documented enhanced strength and aggression, but those had been observations of partial activations, humans pushing themselves in crisis moments. She was watching a full genetic cascade triggered by lethal toxin exposure. An alarm chimed from the medical display, and Celera's attention snapped back to immediate concerns. Garrett's cellular degradation had stopped. The toxin was still spreading, but his body was adapting to it, using it as fuel for the transformation, rather than succumbing to its lethal effects. But his heart rate was climbing toward dangerous levels, blood pressure, spiking core temperature, rising toward fever territory. He was burning himself out from the inside. Celera moved back to his side, checking vital signs with hands that tried not to shake. His skin was hot to the touch, fever bright and radiating energy like a furnace. She needed to stabilize him, needed to find a way to convince his body that the threat had passed, that it could stop cannibalizing itself for power. That was when she noticed her own hand resting against his bare shoulder. And that was when she felt the change. It started as a subtle shift in his physiology, a slight decrease in heart rate, a fractional drop in core temperature. But Celera's scientific instruments registered it immediately. His stress markers were declining. The cascade of combat hormones flooding his system was beginning to ebb. The aggressive transformation of the Berserker Protocol was slowing, stabilizing, because she was touching him. Celera pulled her hand back in shock, and immediately the instruments showed the reversal. Heart rate climbing, temperature spiking, transformation accelerating again. She placed her hand back on his shoulder, maintaining firm skin-to-skin contact, and watched the reading stabilize once more. It didn't make sense. Navari pheromones affected only their own species, carefully calibrated biological signals that influence social bonding and genetic compatibility. There should be no cross-species effect, no biochemical communication between organisms from completely different evolutionary paths. But the instruments didn't lie. Her touch was damping his stress response. Celera ran a quick analysis on her own biochemistry, noting elevated pheromone production, her patterns pulsing in rhythms that indicated heightened emotional arousal. She was responding to him just as strongly as he was responding to her. Two alien biologies somehow finding common ground, creating a feedback loop that neither species should have been capable of. Unless The thought hit her like a physical blow. Unless humans weren't from a separate evolutionary path at all. Unless whoever had engineered the Berserker protocol into their genome had also built-in compatibility with other species. Made them adaptable not just as warriors, but as partners capable of forming bonds across biological boundaries that should have been insurmountable. It would explain so much. Human ability to eat foods from dozens of different worlds. Their relatively universal blood compatibility. Their uncanny ability to read emotional states in species whose facial expressions bore no resemblance to their own. They'd been designed to integrate, to adapt, to survive anywhere with anyone. And right now, Garrett Thorne's body was recognizing her touch as safe, as non-threatening, as something to protect rather than something to fight. Celera made a decision that she knew would haunt her one way or another. She needed to maximize the effect, needed to provide enough biochemical signal to fully convince his system that it could stand down from combat readiness. And that meant more contact than professional medical protocols would ever permit. But the alternative was watching him burn out in front of her, his own genetic programming consuming him from within. She checked the laboratory seals confirming that they were secure and that Corin's team was maintaining perimeter outside. Then she returned to Garrett's side and began the careful process of removing the last of his tactical gear, leaving him in only the thin underlayer that combat personnel wore beneath their armor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing he probably couldn't hear her, but needing to say it anyway. "I'm sorry for what I'm about to do, and I'm sorry for the assignment they gave me, and I'm sorry that my species has been lying to yours for 3 decades. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice, pupils dilated with pain and transformation, but still tracking her movement with surprising clarity. Those pale gray eyes found hers and held, and Celera saw recognition in them. Awareness, understanding, even though she couldn't imagine how much he could actually process in his current state. "Doc," he managed, his voice deepened and roughened by the changes racking through his system. "What's happening to me?" Celera moved closer, her hand finding his pulse point at his neck, feeling the strong, rapid beat of his heart. "Your body is trying to save you," she said softly. "But it's going to kill you in the process unless I can convince it to stop. And the only way I know how to do that is through biochemical signaling, through touch and thumb." She waited for protest, for rejection, for the professional boundaries that should have existed between them. Instead, Garrett Thorne's transformed body shuddered once and he nodded slightly. "Do it," he whispered. "Whatever you need to do. I trust your judgment." 3 words that carried the weight of absolute faith. 3 words from a man who had taken a blade for her barely an hour ago. 3 words that made her luminescence blaze with emotions she'd been trained since childhood to suppress. Celera placed both hands against his chest, feeling the powerful rhythm of his dual-chambered heart, feeling the heat radiating from his transforming body. And she felt the immediate response, the way his physiology recognized her presence and began to calm, to stabilize, to find equilibrium. Her own body responded in kind. Pheromone production spiked. Her patterns pulsed in synchronization with his heartbeat. Every nerve ending seemed to come alive with awareness of this contact, this connection that transcended species and protocols and everything she'd been taught about how the universe worked. This was impossible. This was undeniable. This was going to change everything. The laboratory's ambient systems dimmed in response to Celera's unconscious biochemical signals, creating an environment optimized for the delicate work of stabilization. She positioned herself beside Garrett on the medical platform, maximizing skin contact, while her scientific instruments monitored every molecular interaction between their bodies. The effect was profound and immediate. Where their skin touched, Celera's cooler Navari physiology seemed to draw heat from his fever-bright human warmth, creating temperature equilibrium that her sensor registered as optimal for healing. Her pheromones, designed by evolution to communicate safety and social bonding within her own species, somehow translated across the biological divide to tell his raging immune system that the threat had passed. Time became fluid as Celera worked. Minutes blurred into hours as she monitored the transformation, watching genetic sequences activate and then gradually stabilize. The Berserker protocol's aggressive enhancement began to plateau, settling into sustainable levels rather than the catastrophic cascade that would have consumed him entirely. Through it all, she maintained contact, her hands moving over his transforming physiology with clinical precision, even as her own body betrayed the intimacy of the moment. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered in rhythms she couldn't control, cascading down her arms and neck, in displays that would have mortified her under normal circumstances. But there was nothing normal about this situation, nothing in her training that had prepared her for the reality of biochemical synchronization with an alien species. Garrett drifted in and out of awareness, his enhanced perception catching fragments of her voice as she narrated her observations into the laboratory's recording systems. Scientific documentation mixed with soft reassurances, clinical analysis punctuated by whispered encouragements that had nothing to do with research protocols and everything to do with not wanting him to feel alone through the transformation. Somewhere around the third hour, his eyes opened with sudden clarity, the silver ring around his irises reflecting the laboratory's soft glow. "I can hear everything," he said, his voice carrying that new resonant quality. "Your heartbeat, both chambers working in perfect synchronization, the hum of the equipment, footsteps 3 floors above us. The protocol has enhanced your sensory processing." Celera explained, her analytical mind cataloging the changes even as part of her marveled at them. "Your brain is receiving and processing approximately 3 times the sensory input you're accustomed to." "Is it permanent?" he asked without apparent fear, just curiosity about his new reality. Celira pulled up the genetic analysis, studying the stabilized sequences. "Yes, the changes have integrated at the cellular level. You'll retain approximately 60% of the protocol's enhancement indefinitely." She watched him process this information, saw the moment he accepted the transformation as a fact rather than fighting against it. That acceptance, that adaptability seemed quintessentially human in a way that made her scientific heart ache with the realization of what his species represented. "The scans show something else," Celira said, carefully pulling around the holographic display so he could see it. "Our biochemistries are synchronizing, creating molecular bridges that facilitate communication between our systems. This shouldn't be possible between species from different evolutionary paths." Garrett studied the data with surprising comprehension, his enhanced cognitive processing allowing him to grasp concepts that would have taken baseline humans significant time to absorb. "But it's happening anyway," he observed. "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet," Celira admitted. "The closest parallel in Navari biology would be pair bonding, but that requires months of genetic compatibility testing and council approval. This is spontaneous, chaotic, immediate. Everything my species was designed to avoid." "And how do you feel about that?" Garrett asked quietly, his new sensory acuity undoubtedly reading every stress marker in her system. Celira met his eyes, those gray irises now ringed with silver, and decided that if she was violating every protocol anyway, she might as well be honest. "Terrified, fascinated, exhilarated in ways I was conditioned to suppress. You represent everything I was taught to fear about chaos and unpredictability. And yet all I feel when I touch you is rightness, as if this connection is what I've been missing without knowing I was incomplete." Before Garrett could respond, the laboratory's external communication system chimed. Celira reluctantly pulled away from him, noting how both their stress levels immediately began climbing at the loss of contact. She moved to the communication panel, adjusting her scholar's robes to something approaching professional appearance. The holographic display showed Subcommander Corrin waiting outside the sealed entrance. His patterns flickered with agitation, and his posture radiated barely contained urgency. Celira activated the channel. "Subcommander, status report." "High Scholar, I need to brief you on the situation," Corrin said without preamble. "The assassin from the summit has been processed. Initial interrogation that suggests connection to larger militant network opposed to human integration. But more immediately, your research assistant, Dr. Thena, has been attempting to gain access to your laboratory. She's claiming medical emergency protocols should override your privacy seals." Celira's luminescence dimmed with concern. "Dr. Thena is my colleague, but she has no authorization for this research." "What's her stated reasoning?" "She won't elaborate beyond claiming she needs to verify your safety and ensure protocols are being followed." Corrin paused, his expression thoughtful. "High Scholar, the laboratory's external bioscan outputs are visible to anyone with research credentials. If Dr. Thena has been monitoring those readings..." The implication hung in the air. The bioscan data would show exactly what was happening inside the laboratory. The biochemical synchronization, the genetic transformation, the unmistakable markers of cross-species biological integration. Understood, Salira said quietly. Subcommander, I need you to deny her access for the next several hours. The patient is stable, but the treatment is at a critical phase. Interruption could be catastrophic. I can maintain perimeter security, Corin confirmed. But High Scholar, be aware that rumors are already circulating. The summit attack has the entire council on high alert, and your emergency extraction of the human bodyguard has generated significant questions. Whatever you're doing in there won't remain private for long. I understand. Just buy me enough time to complete the stabilization and prepare proper documentation. Once I have the data compiled, I'll present it to the council myself. Corin nodded slowly. For what it's worth, High Scholar, what you did at the summit, taking command, making the hard call to bring him here, that showed real courage. Whatever comes next, know that some of us respect the choice you made. The communication channel closed, leaving Salira standing in silence as the weight of her situation settled onto her shoulders. She'd violated council protocols, used classified research facilities for unauthorized purposes, and was now engaged in biochemical integration that would scandalize her entire species if it became public knowledge. And she was about to make it worse. Because looking at Garrett Thorne, transformed and vulnerable, and trusting her with his life, Salira knew that what was happening between them transcended professional boundaries. The data showed permanent biochemical synchronization forming. Her own emotional state confirmed what her scientific instruments could only measure imperfectly. They were bonding, truly permanently bonding in ways that should have been impossible. She returned to Garrett's side and immediately felt the rightness of contact as their biochemistries recognized each other. That was Corin, she explained. The situation is getting complicated. How complicated? Garrett asked, his enhanced perception clearly reading the stress in her voice. My research assistant has been monitoring external bioscan data. She knows something unusual is happening, and the council is asking questions about why I brought you here instead of using public medical facilities. So your career is at risk because you saved my life. My career was at risk the moment I took an assignment to find weaknesses in your species, Salira corrected. This just accelerated the timeline for consequences. Garrett's hand found her scarred human fingers interlacing with her slender blue ones. What happens next? Salira looked at their joined hands, at the visual representation of everything impossible about their connection. I compile the data, document the transformation, the biochemical synchronization, everything the scans have captured. Then I present it to the council with full scientific rigor and let them decide how to respond. You're going to tell them the truth, Garrett said. It wasn't a question. I'm a scientist. Truth is all I have. Salira met his eyes. They assigned me to find human weaknesses. Instead, I found something they've been hiding for 30 years. That your species was engineered as guardians, not conquerors. That the Berserker Protocol activates specifically in response to threats to others, not for self-preservation. That humans are designed to protect, to bond, to integrate with other species in ways that make both stronger together. That's going to terrify them, Garrett observed. Yes, but suppressing it only creates the kind of information vacuum that extremists fill with fear-based narratives. The assassin tonight proves that. Someone knew about the protocol, knew it could be triggered, and used that knowledge to stage an attack meant to prove humans are dangerous. The only way to counter that narrative is with complete transparency. Salira pulled up the genetic data, her fingers dancing through holographic interfaces as she began compiling her findings into comprehensive format. The irony is that you proved exactly the opposite of what they intended. You took a blade meant for me without hesitation. You're enduring this transformation without complaint. And right now, even with enhancement that makes you physically formidable, you're choosing to trust my judgment rather than giving in to aggressive impulses. I'm choosing to trust you, Garrett corrected gently. Not just your judgment as a scientist, you as a person who's risking everything to do what's right. The simple statement made Salira's patterns flare bright with emotions she didn't have names for. She returned to his side, maintaining the contact that kept his transformation stable, while her scientific instruments continued their documentation. Tell me something, she said softly. Why did you do it? Take that blade, I mean. You didn't know me. I was just another dignitary you were assigned to protect. Garrett was quiet for a moment, his enhanced perception allowing him to process memories with new clarity. 3 years ago, I was leading security for a treaty signing on Mars colony. Terrorists attack multiple threats, split-second decisions. I made the wrong call, prioritized protecting the venue over protecting the people. A diplomat named Sarah Martinez died because I didn't position myself between her and danger when it mattered. His hand tightened on hers. I've been carrying that failure ever since, volunteering for impossible assignments, looking for opportunities to balance the scales. And then tonight I saw that blade coming for you and I didn't think. I just moved, chose protection over tactics, person over mission. And for the first time in 3 years, it felt like I'd finally gotten the choice right. Salira felt the weight of his confession, understood the guilt that had been driving him, saw how this moment of transformation was also a moment of redemption. You saved my life, she said quietly. And now I'm watching you become something more than you were, all because you chose to protect someone you'd never met. That's not a weapons action, Garrett. That's what guardians do. Is that what you're going to tell the council, he asked? That I'm a guardian, not a threat. I'm going to tell them what the data shows. That the Berserker protocol is sophisticated protection programming, not a weapon system designed for conquest. That humans become more capable when defending others, not when pursuing self-interest. That your species was engineered to be exactly what the galaxy needs, beings willing and able to stand between danger and those who need protection. She pulled up the final compilation of her research, the comprehensive analysis that would either vindicate her choices or destroy her career. And I'm going to tell them about us, about the biochemical synchronization that shouldn't be possible but is happening anyway, about how my Navari physiology stabilizes your enhanced state, and how your presence affects my biochemistry in ways that transcend clinical observation. You're going to admit we're bonding, Garrett said, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. I'm going to present the scientific evidence and let them draw their own conclusions. But yes, the data clearly shows permanent biochemical integration between our systems. What Navari would call pair bonding, forming through contact and compatibility, rather than through controlled genetic matching. Salira's luminescence flickered with something that might have been fear or determination or both. My species eliminated spontaneous attraction generations ago, optimized ourselves into beings who choose partners through analytical compatibility assessment rather than emotional connection. I was raised to believe that chaos and unpredictability were evolutionary weaknesses to be suppressed. And now, Garrett prompted gently, now I'm experiencing exactly that kind of chaotic, unpredictable attraction to an alien who represents everything I was taught to avoid. And my scientific instruments confirm what my conditioning tells me is impossible, that this connection is real, sustainable, and potentially more stable than anything my species achieves through genetic optimization. She met his eyes, her voice dropping to something more personal than professional. I don't know what that means for us long-term. I don't know if the council will even let there be a long-term, but I know that I can't suppress this data or pretend this connection doesn't exist just because it challenges everything my culture believes about proper relationship formation. Before Garrett could respond, the laboratory's alarm systems erupted in urgent warning. Salira's hands flew across the holographic interface, pulling up security feeds that showed multiple armed signatures approaching through the lower levels. Not standard Navari security protocols, these movement patterns were aggressive, coordinated, military precise. Militants. The same faction that had staged the assassination attempt was coming for them, and they had perhaps 3 minutes before breach. Salira's analytical mind raced through scenarios and found no acceptable outcomes. Run and abandon her research. Impossible, the data was too valuable. Surrender and become captives. Unacceptable, they'd be used as propaganda for anti-integration narratives. Fight with Garrett, still recovering from transformation. Dangerous in the extreme. But looking at the approaching threat, at the man she'd just begun bonding with, at the research that could change everything about how the galaxy understood humanity, Salira made a choice that combined all three. Garrett, she said, her voice steady despite her racing hearts. How do you feel, physically, I mean? Can you move? He sat up carefully, testing his enhanced physiology with the kind of tactical assessment that spoke to his military background. I'm weak from the transformation, but functional. What do you need? I need you to trust me one more time. Celera pulled up the laboratory's defensive systems, her scientific mind adapting to tactical problem solving with surprising facility. We're about to have hostile company, 12 armed militants who probably want to capture us both as evidence that human-Navari cooperation is dangerous. How long until they breach? 2 minutes 40 seconds. Garrett rose from the platform, his transformed body moving with economical precision despite obvious weakness. Weapons? This is a research facility, not an armory. Celera gestured to the laboratory equipment. But I have environmental controls, surveillance systems, and synthesis capabilities. What if I provide tactical coordination and you provide physical response? Understanding flickered across Garrett's features. You're proposing we work together. Your intelligence, my capability. Exactly. I can see them through surveillance before you can manipulate the environment to create advantages, synthesize chemical agents for defense. But I need you to be my arms and legs to execute the tactical responses I can't manage myself. And you think that will work? Garrett asked. But Celera could see he was already positioning himself, his enhanced senses cataloging potential cover points and defensive positions. I think it's our only chance, Celera replied honestly. And I think if we can demonstrate effective cooperation under extreme pressure, it might prove more convincingly than any research data that humans and Navari working together create something greater than either species alone. Garrett's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile despite the circumstances. All right, Doc, your tactical command. Tell me what you need. Celera felt something settle into place, a rightness to the partnership that transcended the immediate danger. She pulled up the surveillance feeds, activated the laboratory's defensive protocols, and began synthesizing compounds that would give them every possible advantage. Lockdown initiated, she announced, watching the laboratory's security systems engage. All entrances sealed except primary access. I'm funneling them into a single approach vector. Smart eliminates their numerical advantage if they can't spread out, reducing lighting to 30%. Your enhanced vision can compensate, but theirs can't. Celera's fingers danced across the holographic controls with increasing confidence. I'm also releasing a mild respiratory irritant into the main chamber. Navari systems are more sensitive than human. It should impair their effectiveness without causing permanent damage. How long until breach? Garrett had positioned himself behind laboratory equipment that provided cover while maintaining sight lines to the entrance. 60 seconds. Celera initiated the chemical synthesis, watching compounds form in the automated chambers with the same precision she'd use for any research protocol. Except this time the goal wasn't advancing scientific knowledge, it was survival. Garrett, she said quietly as the countdown approached 0. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I want you to know that meeting you, everything that's happened tonight, has been worth it, even if this goes badly. His enhanced hearing caught her words despite the distance and alarm noise. It's not going to go badly, Doc. We're going to prove your thesis about cooperation. Then we're going to have some very pointed conversations with your counsel about truth and transparency. The main entrance exploded inward with controlled precision, and 12 militants flooded through in tight formation, weapons raised and searching for targets. Through the surveillance feeds, Celera watched their coordinated movement, noted their tactical discipline, and began calling out information with clinical precision. 3 moving to your left flank, 2 holding at entrance as rear guard, primary group of 7 pushing center. Garrett moved through the dimmed lighting like a shadow, given form his enhanced speed and strength, making him nearly impossible to track. But it was their coordination that created the real advantage. Where he could see 1 or 2 enemies in his immediate vicinity, Celera's surveillance perspective gave her omniscient awareness of all 12 militants simultaneously. Flanking movement from your right, redirect to defensive position beta. He flowed to the indicated position without hesitation, trusting her guidance absolutely. Chemical agent released. They're experiencing respiratory distress. Strike now while they're disorganized. Garrett hit the impaired militants with economical precision, each strike calculated for maximum disabling effect with minimum permanent damage. His enhanced physiology made him faster and stronger than baseline human, but Celera noted that he maintained careful control, choosing restraint over overwhelming force. 4 down, Garrett reported, his breathing barely elevated despite the exertion. 8 remaining. They're adapting, spreading out to create crossfire positions. Celera manipulated the laboratory's lighting, creating strobing effects that disoriented normal Navari vision, while Garrett's enhanced perception compensated automatically. Advancing on your position, use equipment storage unit as cover. The engagement became a deadly dance choreographed by Celera's tactical awareness and executed by Garrett's transformed capability. Every time the militants tried to coordinate, she disrupted their communication with environmental manipulation. Every time they attempted to overwhelm Garrett with numbers, she identified the threat and guided him to safer positioning. But even coordination couldn't eliminate the fundamental reality of 12 against 1. An energy bolt caught Garrett's shoulder, spinning him partially around. Celera felt the impact through their nascent connection, a phantom pain that made her gasp. But he recovered almost immediately, his enhanced physiology processing the damage and compensating. 6 down, he called out, his voice steady despite the injury. 6 remaining. Then Celera saw the flanking movement, one militant breaking away from the primary group and heading toward the secure section where she'd positioned herself at the surveillance controls. Her heart leapt into her throat as she realized the tactical shift. Garrett 1 heading for my position. She watched through the feeds as Garrett processed the information, saw the moment the Berserker protocol fully engaged in response to direct threat to her specifically. His movement change became less controlled and more primal, raw, protective instinct, overriding tactical discipline. He covered the distance to the flanking militant in 3 explosive strides that shouldn't have been physically possible, intercepted the threat with devastating precision, and eliminated it with a level of force that made Celera's luminescence dim with a concern. But the aggressive movement exposed his back to the remaining militants. Garrett behind you. The energy bolt caught him in the lower back, superheated plasma punching through already damaged tissue. Celera felt his pain spike through their connection, watched him go down hard through the surveillance feeds, saw the militants closing in for capture, or worse. Their leader, a scarred Navari male whose patterns pulsed aggressive crimson, pressed his weapon against Garrett's temple with brutal efficiency. Enough, the militant commanded, his voice carrying through the laboratory with cold authority. High Scholar, I know you can hear me. Come out now with hands visible or your human dies. You have 10 seconds to comply. Celera stood frozen in the secure section, her scientific mind racing through scenarios and finding no acceptable outcomes. Stay hidden and Garrett dies. Surrender and they both become propaganda for the exact fear-based narrative she'd been trying to counter with scientific evidence. Through their nascent connection, she felt Garrett's wordless message. Stay safe, wait for help. I'll be fine. But he wouldn't be fine. Even with his enhanced physiology, an energy bolt to the brain at point-blank range would kill him instantly. Celera unsealed the secure section door with steady hands despite her racing hearts. She walked out slowly, hands raised and visible, her luminescence controlled despite the fear and fury burning through her system. Let him go, she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of her rank despite the circumstances. I'll come willingly. You have what you wanted. The militant leader smiled, an expression that held no warmth. The brilliant High Scholar sacrificing herself for a human. Perfect evidence of exactly the contamination we've been warning against. The Council will have no choice but to acknowledge the danger when they see how thoroughly you've been compromised. Or they'll see evidence that cooperation works. Celera countered, her scientific mind still processing data even in crisis. That beings from different worlds can choose to protect each other. That whatever artificial divisions exist between our species, they're not insurmountable. We'll let history judge, the leader said dismissively. Secure them both. Prepare for... The laboratory's secondary entrances exploded inward simultaneously, and Sub-Commander Corin Valth's security team flooded in with devastating tactical precision. The militants caught between Garrett's position and the new threat made the fatal error of hesitation. Corin's team moved with professional efficiency, neutralizing threats with non-lethal but absolutely effective force. The militant leader's weapon wavered as his tactical situation collapsed, and in that moment of distraction, Garrett moved. Even wounded, even disadvantaged, the Berserker protocol gave him speed that turned moments into opportunities. He twisted away from the weapon at his temple, drove his elbow into the leader's midsection with bone-breaking force, swept his legs out from under him with economical precision. Within seconds, Corrin's team had secured the perimeter and neutralized all hostile armed threats. Garrett stood over the militant leader with the confiscated weapon pointed at his head, and Celera saw the war playing out across his transformed features. The protocol screaming for completion, for elimination of the threat that had endangered her, for simple, brutal, final solution. But through their connection, Celera also felt his conscious mind fighting against genetic imperatives, choosing restraint over rage, discipline over destruction, proving with every controlled breath that humans were more than their biological programming. Garrett, Celera said softly, moving to his side despite Corrin's gesture to stay back. It's over. Stand down. Come back to me. Her hand touched his arm and the contact seemed to ground him. The aggressive intensity in his silver-ringed eyes recalibrated, transformed fury, finding equilibrium in her presence. He lowered the weapon, stepped back, let Corrin's team take custody of the militant leader. That, Corrin said carefully as his team secured the prisoners, was the most impressive defensive coordination I have witnessed in 2 decades of security work. We had good motivation, Garrett replied, his eyes finding Celera's. Corrin's patterns shifted to something approaching respect. The entire security network has been recording, every moment from initial breach through resolution. High Scholar, your tactical coordination while maintaining non-lethal countermeasures, and Thorn, your restraint in using only necessary force despite clear provocation. He paused, his expression thoughtful. Together, you've demonstrated something the Council needs to see. Proof that cooperation between our species creates capability neither possesses alone. He gestured to his team. Get medical attention for both of them, and someone establish a priority channel to the High Council. What happened here tonight changes everything we thought we knew about human-Navari cooperation. As Corrin's medics began treating Garrett's wounds, Celera stood amid the wreckage of her laboratory and felt the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished settling onto her shoulders. They'd survived. They'd proven cooperation worked under extreme pressure. And now the galaxy was watching, waiting to see what meaning would be extracted from this impossible night. She moved to Garrett's side as the medics worked her hand, finding his despite the chaos around them. Through their connection, she felt his exhaustion, his pain, but also his satisfaction. They'd done it, proven the thesis, demonstrated that partnership transcended biology. The Council is going to demand answers, she said quietly. Then we give them truth. Garrett replied, his enhanced perception still tracking every movement in the laboratory even while receiving treatment. All of it. The protocol, the bonding, everything we've learned about what humans and Navari can accomplish together. Celera looked at their joined hands, human tan against Navari blue, and felt certainty crystallize despite the uncertainty ahead. Together, she agreed. Always, Garrett replied, and despite everything, Celera felt something approaching peace settle into her chest. They'd crossed lines tonight that couldn't be uncrossed, violated protocols that would have consequences, changed the trajectory of their own lives and potentially the relationship between their entire species. But looking at this impossible human who had transformed her understanding of courage, partnership, and what it meant to truly connect with another being, Celera knew she wouldn't change a single choice. The future was uncertain, the Council's response unpredictable, the political ramifications potentially catastrophic. But they would face it together, human and Navari, guardian and scientist, partners in ways that transcended biology and protocol and everything either species thought they knew about the limits of cooperation. And that Celera reflected as medical teams worked around them and security processed the aftermath of violence was exactly what would make all the difference. 6 hours later, Celera stood in a medical bay that smelled of antiseptic and uncertainty, watching a Navari physician treat the last of her minor injuries. Across the room, Garrett endured his own medical care with characteristic stoicism, though their connection let her feel the dull ache of his wounds beneath the physician's ministrations. The holographic display dominating one wall showed statistics that made Celera's scientific mind recognize viral propagation patterns. 42 million views across Navari networks. The security footage from her laboratory had leaked all of it. The defensive coordination, the tactical partnership, the undeniable evidence of biochemical synchronization between species that weren't supposed to be compatible. Public opinion analysis scrolled beneath the footage in real-time updates. 47% expressing fear about human enhancement. 32% supporting integration, 21% undecided waiting for more information before forming conclusions. They're terrified. Doctor. Adelaide Voss said quietly, the Navari physician's patterns flickering with sympathetic concern as she sealed Salira's last wound. Not just of what humans can become, but of what it means that you've bonded with one. You're a symbol now, High Scholar, whether you wanted to be or not. I never wanted to be a symbol, Salira replied, watching another clip replay. This one showed the moment she'd walked out to save Garrett, her luminescence blazing with determination and fear in equal measure. I just wanted to do good science. Sometimes good science changes everything. Adelaide stepped back, her work complete. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next. What came next arrived in the form of Sub-Commander Corin, his patterns pulsing with barely controlled urgency as he entered the medical bay. High Scholar, Thorne, the Council has issued a formal summons. Tomorrow morning, 0900 hours. You're to present yourselves for inquiry regarding the events of the past 12 hours. Inquiry, Salira repeated, her analytical mind immediately recognizing the careful word choice. Not hearing, not trial, inquiry. Elder Misha's influence, Corin confirmed. She's arguing that this situation requires scientific review before political judgment. But High Scholar, you need to understand the pressure she's under. Half the council wants you stripped of credentials immediately. The other half wants to study you like a laboratory specimen. Elder Misha is barely holding the center ground. Garrett rose from his examination platform, moving with the only slight stiffness despite the serious wounds he'd sustained. The Berserker Protocol's enhancement had accelerated his healing to levels that made even Navari physicians express quiet amazement. What about the militants? Have they revealed who ordered the attacks? They're maintaining silence, Corin said grimly. But their equipment traces back to several prominent families in the genetic purity movement. We're looking at organized opposition with significant resources and political connections. They wanted to prove humans were dangerous, Salira said, the pattern becoming clear. Stage attacks that would trigger the Berserker Protocol, capture footage of enhanced human combat capability, use it to justify segregation policies or worse. Except you complicated their narrative, Corin replied, his patterns shifting to something that might have been approval. The footage shows a human fighting with remarkable restraint, choosing non-lethal force when lethal would have been easier. Shows a Navari scientist coordinating defense while maintaining ethical limits on violence. Together you demonstrated exactly what they didn't want, proven that cooperation works. Or we demonstrated that humans are dangerous, and I've been compromised, Salira countered. Depends on which narrative the viewer wants to believe. Which is why tomorrow's presentation is critical. Corin moved closer, his voice dropping to something more personal than professional. High Scholar, I've served in security for 2 decades. I've seen conflicts across a dozen systems. And what I witnessed in your laboratory tonight was the most effective combat partnership I've ever encountered. You two weren't just fighting together, you were thinking as one unit. His enhanced capability and your tactical intelligence created something greater than either species possesses alone. He looked between them with serious intensity. If you can make the Kalnoa see that, if you can frame this as symbiotic partnership rather than dangerous contamination, you might change everything. Or you might accelerate the push for segregation. There's no middle ground anymore. After Corin departed to coordinate security arrangements, Salira and Garrett stood in contemplative silence, both acutely aware that the next 12 hours would determine not just their own futures, but potentially the trajectory of human-Navari relations for generations. I should prepare a presentation, Salira said finally, her scientific mind already organizing data and arguments. Compile the research document. The transformation and bonding process provide evidence-based analysis of what the Berserker Protocol actually represents versus the threats people imagine. How long will that take? Garrett asked. Working through the night, maybe I can have something coherent by morning. His hand found hers, a simple touch, sending reassurance through their connection. Then we work through the night. Together. You compile the science, I'll help however I can. They relocated to temporary quarters. Corin had secured a small research suite equipped with basic laboratory equipment and holographic projection capabilities. Celera immediately immersed herself in data compilation, pulling together everything she'd discovered about human genetics, the Berserker protocol, and the biochemical mechanisms of their cross-species synchronization. Garrett worked beside her with surprising effectiveness, his enhanced perception allowing him to process information at speeds that astonished them both. He organized her research, identified inconsistencies, asked questions that forced her to clarify her thinking. It was, Celera reflected somewhere around midnight, exactly what a good research partner should provide. This section about pain response triggers, Garrett said, highlighting a portion of her analysis. You're framing it as aggression enhancement, but look at the activation conditions more carefully. The protocol doesn't respond to general pain, it's specifically keyed to perceived threats against others. Celera pulled up the genetic sequences, studying them with fresh perspective, informed by his observation. He was absolutely correct. The Berserker protocol's primary activation pathway required neural assessment that someone worth protecting was in danger. Self-preservation alone triggered only partial enhancement. You were engineered as guardians, she breathed, the full implication crystallizing. Not warriors for conquest. Guardians for protection. The protocol doesn't make you better at attacking, it makes you better at defending. Which explains why I took that blade for you without conscious thought, Garrett said quietly, and why the full transformation didn't engage until you were specifically threatened during the laboratory attack. My enhanced perception recognized you as someone worth protecting, and the protocol responded accordingly. Celera began rewriting entire sections of her analysis, reframing the Berserker protocol from biological weapon system to sophisticated protection mechanism. The distinction was subtle but critical. Weapons existed to destroy, guardians existed to preserve. One narrative justified fear and segregation. The other suggested potential for partnership that could benefit both species. By dawn, she had assembled a presentation that told a fundamentally different story than the militants had wanted spread. Not humans as existential threats requiring containment, but humans as partners offering capabilities that complemented very analytical strengths. Not contamination through biochemical bonding, but symbiotic enhancement that made both species more effective together than apart. It's compelling, Garrett said, reviewing her final compilation. Well-documented, scientifically rigorous. The question is whether they'll be willing to hear it. They'll hear it, Celera replied with more confidence than her racing hearts justified. Whether they'll accept the evidence is another matter entirely. As they prepared to depart for the council chambers, both felt the weight of history pressing down on this moment. The next few hours would determine whether cooperation or segregation defined the future relationship between their species. The transport vehicle moved through early morning streets that bore visible evidence of the previous night's chaos. Protest barriers around government buildings. Security checkpoints that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. The physical manifestation of a society struggling with revelations that challenged fundamental assumptions. They were 10 minutes from the council chambers when Corin's voice erupted from the transport's communication system, strained with urgency that bypassed all professional protocols. All units priority alert. Council chambers have been breached. Hostage situation in progress. Multiple armed militants demanding immediate cessation of human integration programs and surrender of Highscaler, then of Argy, and Garrett Thorne for public trial. Repeat council chambers compromised. 23 hostages confirmed, including 3 council members. Elder Maisha among them. Celera's hearts plummeted. The woman who had defended them, who had argued for scientific inquiry over political reaction, now held hostage because she'd shown them compassion. Through the transport windows, she watched emergency response vehicles converging on the council complex security cordons, establishing perimeter, the organized chaos of tactical response to active crisis. Corin to Garrett said, his enhanced tactical mind immediately processing scenarios. What are their specific demands? The sub-commander's response carried barely controlled tension. Immediate expulsion of all human delegations from Navari space. Public trial of you and the High Scholar for genetic contamination charges. And full disclosure of all classified xenobiological research to be used as evidence of conspiracy between human and Navari progressive factions. Same group as before, Garrett said with certainty. They failed to prove their point with the assassination and laboratory attacks. This is escalation. What's your tactical assessment? Corin asked, and Salira realized the question was directed at both of them. Garrett looked at Salira, deferring to her judgment despite his combat expertise. Through their connection, she felt his trust, his willingness to support whatever choice she made. Her analytical mind raced through scenarios. Surrender meant becoming propaganda. Refusing meant potential hostage executions. Direct assault risked casualties that would vindicate militant narratives about human violence. Unless there was a third option they weren't expecting. Corin, Salira said slowly, her scientific mind finding patterns in chaos. What if we don't surrender and we don't give them excuse for violence? What if there's another way entirely? High Scholar, these are trained militants with superior positions and hostages as shields. Even with Thorne's capabilities, assault would result in casualties. I'm not proposing assault, Salira said, clarity crystallizing. I'm proposing negotiation. They want me to prove their narrative that cooperation is dangerous. What if instead I prove the opposite? What if I walk in there and present my research, the same presentation I prepared for the council, show them what the Berserker Protocol actually is, what our bonding actually means, what humans and Navari can actually accomplish together when we choose partnership over fear? Garrett studied her face, his enhanced perception, reading every micro-expression. You want to negotiate with extremists using scientific evidence. Turn their propaganda platform into your research presentation. They won't listen, Corin protested through the communication channel. These are ideologues, High Scholar. They're not interested in data that contradicts their beliefs. Maybe not, Salira agreed, but the hostages will listen. And more importantly, this entire event is being broadcast through security networks. The galaxy is watching. If I can make my case publicly, even if the militants reject it, the broader population might hear truth instead of fear-based narratives. It's incredibly dangerous, Garrett said quietly. They could execute you the moment you walk in. Or they could give me a platform to speak truth to the largest audience I'll ever have. Salira met his eyes, feeling certainty despite the fear. You told me that weapons can choose to become shields, that power can be channeled into protection. Let me prove that science can be a shield too. That knowledge and truth can protect better than violence. Through their connection, she felt him struggle with protective instincts, warring against respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you close but concealed. If negotiation fails, if they threaten executions, then you intervene. But Garrett, if possible, I need restraint. Non-lethal response only. Because the moment lethal force is used, even in justified defense, it proves their narrative about human danger. You're asking me to fight with severe tactical limitations while your life is on the line. I'm asking you to trust my strategy the way I trusted yours in the laboratory, Salira said gently. Together, we're stronger than alone. Your restraint, in my words, working in concert to prove cooperation, works better than violence. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then his lips quirked in something approaching a smile despite the circumstances. You realize you're asking the enhanced human to be the peaceful one while the Navari scientist walks into danger. That's going to confuse a lot of people's expectations. Good, Salira replied. Confusing expectations is how we change narratives. They rerouted to the council chambers, coordinating with the Corin on approach vectors and communication protocols. The sub-commander remained deeply skeptical, but acknowledged that conventional tactical response offered limited options against hostage situations where any violence would be weaponized for propaganda. I'll position Thorne in the ventilation systems overlooking the main chamber. Corin said, architectural schematics appearing on the transport's display. He'll have sight lines to most positions, but High Scholar understand that if this deteriorates, if they harm you or hostages, the political fallout will be catastrophic regardless of our response. Then I won't let it deteriorate, Salira said with more confidence than her racing hearts justified. The council chambers rose before them, elegant architecture now surrounded by security barriers and emergency response teams. Salira could see tension in every officer's posture, fear of escalation mixing with determination to protect both hostages and the fragile political balance that had taken decades to establish. Garrett accompanied her as far as the ventilation access point, his enhanced strength making the sealed entrance trivial to bypass. Before he climbed into the maintenance shaft, he pulled her close, their connection thrumming with intensity that made her patterns blaze. Come back to me, he said quietly against her hair. Always. Salira promised, watching him disappear into shadows with predatory grace that would have terrified her 24 hours ago, but now felt like safety incarnate. She walked alone toward the council chamber's main entrance, her scholar's robes of formal blue against tactical grays and blacks of security personnel. Every eye tracked her movement, every weapon remained ready, every being present, knowing they witnessed something that would be studied for generations. The chamber doors loomed massive and sealed. Salira activated her communication implant, broadcasting on channels she knew the militants would monitor. This is High Scholar Dr. Salira Thenovar. I understand you're holding council members and requesting my presence. I'm here. Let me in and let's discuss this as rational beings pursuing truth rather than violence. Silence stretched for 10 heartbeats. 20. Then the massive doors began to unseal with pneumatic hiss that seemed to echo Salira's own held breath. The council chambers beyond had been transformed from elegant governance space into something that made her scientific mind catalog details automatically. 15 militants in tactical positions, weapons trained on 23 hostages huddled in the center. Elder Misha among them, her patterns pulsing with controlled fear, but her posture unbowed, refusing to show weakness even in captivity. The militant leader stood at the chamber's focal point, a tall Navari male with scarring that spoke of ideological dedication carried to violent extremes. His patterns blazed aggressive crimson, and his weapon tracked Salira's approach with professional precision. High Scholar, he said, voice carrying theatrical projection designed for maximum dramatic impact. How good of you to join us. We were just discussing your research with the council members. They seem quite interested in hearing about genetic contamination firsthand. Salira walked forward with measured steps, hands visible and non-threatening, every movement calculated to project confidence rather than fear. There's been no contamination, she said calmly, only discovery. Would you like to hear about it? The leader's expression flickered with surprise. He'd clearly expected pleading or anger, not scientific engagement. You think we care about your justifications for betraying genetic purity? I think you care about truth, Salira countered. Otherwise, you wouldn't be going to such elaborate lengths to prove your narrative. You could simply execute me and claim humans are dangerous, but you want witnesses. You want documentation. You want proof. So let me provide it. She gestured to the chamber's holographic projection system, still active despite the chaos. I came prepared to present my research to the council. Since they're here, along with galaxy-wide security monitoring, why not let me do exactly that? If my science supports your claims about contamination and danger, you'll have evidence. If it doesn't, then you'll have to confront the possibility that your beliefs might be incomplete. The leader studied her for a long moment, tactical calculation playing behind his eyes. He could refuse to maintain control through force, but that would appear as fear of truth. Or he could accept, give her rope to metaphorically hang herself if her research actually supported militant narratives about human threat. 5 minutes, he said finally. Present your findings. But know that the moment you attempt covert signaling or trigger security responses, hostages start dying. Understood. Salira moved to the projection controls, activating the system with practiced efficiency. Her research bloomed into three-dimensional glory around the chamber, genetic sequences and biochemical data streams, making the air glow with scientific complexity. Through the ventilation systems above, she knew Garrett watched with enhanced perception that could probably read the stress markers in her bioluminescence. But he trusted her judgment, held position, waited. My name is Dr. Salira Thenovar. She began falling into academic presentation rhythms despite her thundering hearts. High Scholar of Xenobiological Research. 3 days ago, I was assigned by the Council to study human genetics for potential weaknesses. She pulled up the classified files, the Berserker Protocol documentation, watching both militants and hostages react to information suppressed for 3 decades. What I discovered instead was truth that's been hidden since first contact. Humans were engineered, not by themselves, but by someone with technological capability far beyond current galactic standards. And they were engineered with a specific purpose. The genetic sequences rotated slowly, highlighted sections pulsing with data streams. The Berserker Protocol, as our xenobiologist designated it, activates under very specific conditions. Not general pain, not simple self-preservation. It requires neural perception of threat to others. To people the subject's brain categorizes as worth protecting. She showed data from Garrett's transformation, the precise activation pathways, the way his enhancement had peaked specifically when she was endangered. This isn't a weapon system designed for conquest. This is a guardian protocol designed for protection. Humans weren't engineered to destroy. They were engineered to defend those who need defending. Semantics, the militant leader interrupted, his weapon still trained on her. A killer is a killer whether you call it weapon or guardian. Is it? Celera pulled up footage from the laboratory attack security recording that millions had already viewed. Watch carefully. Count the number of times enhanced human combat capability could have used lethal force. Count the number of times it chose restraint instead. The footage played in holographic detail. Garrett's transformed speed and strength on full display, but every strike calculated for disabling rather than killing. Every choice made in service of propulsion without unnecessary death. This is a being with capability to end life efficiently, Celera narrated over the playback, choosing instead to preserve it, making moral decisions despite genetic programming pushing towards simpler solutions. That's not a weapon following instructions. That's a person exercising judgment and restraint even under extreme stress. She turned to face the militants directly, her patterns controlled, despite racing hearts. You fear humans because you don't understand them. You fear me because I've bonded with one. But look at what that bonding created. New data streams appeared showing the biochemical synchronization process, the way her Navari pheromones damped Garrett's stress response, the way his enhanced physiology somehow harmonized with her analytical cognitive patterns. This isn't contamination. This is symbiosis. Two species from completely different evolutionary paths finding compatibility that makes both more effective together than apart. You're describing exactly what we fear, the leader countered, though Celera noted his weapon had lowered slightly. Genetic mixing that destroys Navari purity. I'm describing evolution, Celera replied firmly. Your genetic purity isn't perfection, it's stagnation. We've optimized ourselves into a corner where innovation comes slowly because we're afraid of chaos, afraid of unpredictability, afraid of change. Humans represent everything we've bred out of ourselves. And yes, that's frightening, but it's also exactly what we need to continue growing rather than calcifying into genetic stasis. She gestured to Elder Misha among the hostages. She understood this. That's why she argued for scientific inquiry instead of political reaction. Because she recognized that fear-based decision-making leads to exactly this kind of violence. Fear of what we don't understand manifesting as aggression against anything that challenges our comfortable assumptions. The chamber had gone quiet, militants and hostages alike, absorbed in data that challenged fundamental assumptions. Celera felt the moment crystallizing, felt the weight of history turning on what happened in the next few seconds. You wanted proof, she said quietly, her luminescence steady despite the circumstances. I've given you scientific evidence that humans are guardians, not conquerors. That cross-species bonding creates partnership, not contamination. That cooperation makes us stronger, not weaker. Now you have a choice. Accept the evidence and help build something better, or reject it and prove that your ideology values comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. The militant leader's weapon remained lowered, but Celera saw confusion warring with conviction behind his eyes. Years of ideological certainty confronted by data that didn't fit the narrative. The cognitive dissonance of someone discovering that their fundamental beliefs might be incomplete. Then Elder Misha rose slowly from among the captives, her patterns pulsing with the authority of age and position. She's right. The simple statement carried weight that made even militants hesitate. Elder Misha moved forward carefully. No sudden movements, just quiet dignity that commanded attention through sheer presence. I've served on the High Council for 40 years, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I've watched us make decision after decision based on fear instead of facts. Suppress research that challenges our assumptions. Maintain comfortable fictions instead of pursuing difficult truths. And where has it gotten us, standing in our own governance chambers, held hostage by extremists who are so terrified of change that they're willing to kill to prevent it? She turned to address the other hostages, her luminescence blazing with conviction. How many of you watched that footage last night? How many of you saw a human and a Navari working together with perfect coordination, defending themselves without unnecessary violence, proving that cooperation isn't weakness, but strength? The militants are right to be afraid, just not for the reasons they think. They should fear being left behind when the rest of us choose evolution over stagnation. The militant leader swung his weapon toward Elder Misha. Enough propaganda from he never finished the sentence. Garrett dropped from the ventilation shaft like controlled violence given from his enhanced speed, turning thought into action faster than normal perception could track. But Celera felt it through their connection, felt the moment he committed to movement, felt his conscious choice of exactly how to engage. Non-lethal, restrained, surgical. He hit the ground between Elder Mesha and the militant leader, deflecting the weapon's aim away from the elderly council member with economical precision. His combat strikes were measured and controlled, disabling rather than destroying each movement, a demonstration of exactly what Celera had been explaining. Power in service of protection, capability constrained by choice, strength wielded with wisdom rather than rage. The other militants reacted, weapons tracking Garrett's movement, but they were too slow. He moved through their formations like water through stone, dismantling defensive positions without inflicting lethal damage. Every strike calculated, every choice deliberate, every action proving Celera's thesis about guardians versus weapons. And through their connection, Celera felt his internal struggle, felt the Berserker protocol screaming for simpler solutions for elimination of threats through maximum force, felt his conscious mind overriding genetic imperatives, choosing restraint over rage, discipline over destruction. Within 90 seconds, 15 militants lay disarmed and disabled on the chamber floor. Not dead, not permanently injured, just neutralized with the minimum force necessary to protect the hostages and end the crisis. Garrett stood in the center of the chamber, breathing hard, his enhanced physiology having burned enormous energy maintaining such precise control. His silver-ringed eyes found Celera's across the space, and through their bond she felt his question. Did I prove it? Did I show them what you needed? Shown, Celera walked to his side, her hand finding his chest to feel his racing hearts gradually slowing in response to her biochemical presence. Perfect, she said softly for him alone. Then she turned to address the chamber full of witnesses, her voice carrying to both those present and the millions watching through security feeds. This is what Guardian Protocol looks like. Power that could have killed 15 beings in seconds, choosing instead to preserve every life. Enhancement that makes violence more efficient, directed instead toward maximum protection with minimum harm. This is what humans are when they're given reason to trust, when they're partnered with beings who value their capabilities instead of fearing them. She looked directly at the security monitors, knowing the galaxy watched. And this is what Navari-human cooperation can accomplish. His strength in my strategy, his capability in my analytical precision, his protection in my scientific knowledge. Together, we're not contaminated or compromised. We're complete. We're stronger than either species could be alone. We're exactly what evolution looks like when it chooses growth over stagnation. The council chambers erupted into controlled chaos as security teams flooded in to secure the scene. But Celera barely noticed the tactical cleanup operations. She stood with Garrett in the center of change and possibility, feeling their connection pulse with satisfaction and certainty. They'd done it, proven the thesis not through violence but through restraint, demonstrated that cooperation worked better than segregation, shown the galaxy that fear was the wrong response to difference. Now they just had to survive the consequences. The formal council inquiry took place 6 hours later after security had processed militants, treated hostages, and compiled every second of footage from what was already being called the council chamber incident across every news network in Navari space. Celera and Garrett stood before the full High Council, 12 powerful beings whose decisions would shape the future of multiple species. The chamber still showed evidence of the morning's violence, scorch marks on walls, displaced furniture, the lingering scent of fear and adrenaline that even environmental systems couldn't entirely scrub away. Elder Misha spoke first, her voice carrying weight earned through decades of service and the fresh authority of someone who had faced death and emerged unbowed. High scholar then of our, Garrett Thorne, what we witnessed today was unprecedented in council history. A xenobiological researcher and an enhanced human combatant working in perfect synchronization to resolve a hostage crisis without loss of life. The question before us now is what that unprecedented cooperation means for policy going forward. A conservative council member, an elderly male whose patterns pulse traditional blue, leaned forward with careful deliberation. Your research presentation was compelling, high scholar, but it raises troubling questions. If humans were indeed engineered as guardians who did the engineering, for what ultimate purpose? And what happens if those engineers return with different intentions for their creations? Valid questions. Celera acknowledged her scientific mind, appreciating the logical framework even while recognizing the fear beneath. Questions that can only be answered through continued research, open collaboration, and honest communication between our species. Suppressing data hasn't protected us. It's created information vacuums that extremists filled with fear-based narratives. Scientific transparency is the only path forward that serves truth over comfortable fiction. Another council member, a middle-aged female whose patterns flickered with concern, pressed further. And your relationship with Thorne. The biochemical synchronization that should be impossible between species from different evolutionary paths. You maintain this doesn't represent contamination of Navari genetic purity. Celera felt Garrett's presence beside her, felt his support through their connection, felt his trust that she would find the right words. My relationship with Garrett informed my research in ways that pure clinical observation never could, she said clearly, meeting the council member's eyes without flinching. I discovered biochemical compatibility because I experienced it. I understood the Guardian Protocol because I witnessed it protecting me personally. Science isn't about sterile observation from safe distance. It's about understanding through connection, through willingness to experience phenomena rather than just analyzing them from comfortable remove. Her luminescence intensified with conviction. You want to know if I'm compromised? I am. Compromised by caring about the subject of my research as a person rather than a specimen. But that so-called compromise made me a better scientist, not a worse one. Because I couldn't hide behind comfortable objectivity anymore. I had to pursue truth even when it challenged everything I'd been conditioned to believe about genetic purity and proper relationship formation. Garrett spoke for the first time, his deep voice carrying through the chamber with the kind of quiet authority that came from absolute certainty. I don't claim to understand Navari politics or genetic philosophy. I'm just a bodyguard who made a split-second decision to protect someone I thought needed protecting. But what I've learned in the past day is that Dr. Thenovar has more courage than most soldiers I've served with. She risked her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for to pursue truth when suppressing it would have been safer and easier. If that's what genetic contamination looks like, I'd argue you need more of it, not less. Silence followed his words, the kind of profound quiet that suggested careful consideration rather than reflexive rejection. Then Elder Misha spoke again, a slight smile touching her features, despite the gravity of the situation. The Council has reviewed all available evidence. The genetic data documenting the Berserker Protocol, the security footage from both laboratory and chambers, the public response to your presentations, which has shifted significantly in the past 6 hours as people process what they witnessed. And we've reached a decision. Celera braced herself for judgment, feeling Garrett's hand find hers in silent support, despite the formal setting. By a vote of 7-4, Elder Misha continued, her patterns pulsing with what looked like cautious optimism. The Council has approved establishment of an experimental human Navari cooperative program. High Scholar Thenovar will serve as lead scientific director with full authority to recruit personnel and design research protocols. The program's mandate is to explore possibilities for integrated teams combining human enhancement capabilities with Navari analytical and tactical intelligence. Celera felt shock ripple through her chest. The Council is choosing evidence over assumption, Elder Misha replied, choosing demonstrated results over comfortable fiction. You've proven that cooperation works, High Scholar. Now prove it can be replicated, systematized, and expanded beyond individual exceptional partnerships. Show us that what you and Thorne achieved together wasn't merely isolated incident, but reproducible model with broader applications. Another council member added voice-carrying measured warning beneath formal approval. This program will operate under close observation, regular reporting requirements, scientific rigor in all research protocols, and high scholar understand that you will be scrutinized more intensely than any researcher in Navari history. Every decision questioned, every result analyzed for bias or contamination. Can you accept those conditions? I understand and accept. Celera said, her patterns blazing with emotions too complex to name individually. Relief and joy and terror and determination all cascading together into something that felt like purpose crystallizing. There's one final matter, Elder Misha said carefully, her expression shifting to something more personal. The question of your biochemical synchronization with Thorne, the bonding that existing legal frameworks don't adequately address. The Council recognizes that our laws were written for a reality that no longer fully applies. Therefore, we're extending formal recognition to human, Navari-bonded partnerships with all legal rights and protections that traditionally accompany Navari pair bonds. Yours will be the first such recognition, but we anticipate it won't be the last as the cooperative program expands. Celera looked at Garrett, saw understanding and question in his silver-ringed eyes. The Council was offering them legitimacy. Legal marriage by Navari standards, permanent partnership recognized across both their societies with all the social and legal implications that entailed. High Scholar Elder Misha prompted gently, do you and Thorne wish to formalize your bond under this new framework? Through their connection, Celera felt Garrett's emotional state, calm acceptance, mixed with quiet hope, complete willingness to support whatever she decided while simultaneously radiating clear preference for commitment over ambiguity. She squeezed his hand, feeling their synchronized biochemistry humming between them with intensity that transcended words. I spent my life pursuing genetic perfection, she said quietly, speaking to Garrett but knowing the entire council heard. Following protocols designed to optimize every choice for maximum efficiency. Meeting standards established by generations of careful genetic management. And I was empty, accomplished by every measurable standard but hollow. Following all the rules while feeling none of the passion that makes life worth living rather than just enduring. Her luminescence blazed brighter. You showed me that chaos can be beautiful. That imperfection can be exactly what's needed when perfection becomes stagnation. That choosing love over optimization isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing beings can do when comfortable paths are readily available. She turned to face the council fully while maintaining contact with Garrett. So yes, I want to formalize this bond. Yes, I want to build something permanent with this impossible human who saved my life and changed my understanding of what it means to be truly alive rather than just optimized for survival. Yes, I choose partnership over perfection, evolution over stagnation, truth over comfortable lies. Garrett's smile transformed his enhanced features into something that made Celera's hearts ache with the intensity of feeling. Then I guess I'm marrying an alien scientist who's smarter than me, braver than she thinks she is, and who apparently can't resist complicated research projects even when they involve her personal life. The most complicated project yet, Celera agreed, feeling joy bubble through despite everything. The council chamber responded with formal acknowledgments and procedural discussions about documentation and legal frameworks. But Celera barely tracked the administrative details. She stood with Garrett in the center of possibility, feeling the future opening before them with terrifying and wonderful uncertainty. 3 months later, Celera stood in her new laboratory, twice the size of the facility destroyed during the militant attack, and equipped with technology that represented the council's genuine investment in the cooperative program's success. Around her, integrated teams worked in harmonious coordination that would have seemed impossible before the council chamber incident changed everything. Corporal Brennan Cole, a human-enhanced specialist, worked with Dr. Adelaide Voss on biochemical research, exploring cross-species medical applications. Dr. Lyndon Hart partnered with a Navari tactical analyst on perception enhancement studies. Each team demonstrating that what Celera and Garrett had achieved wasn't unique miracle, but replicable model. The program's success metrics exceeded even optimistic projections. 20 integrated teams now operated across various sectors: medical research, emergency response, security coordination, diplomatic protection. Public approval for continued cooperation had climbed to 63% as people watched human-navari partnerships resolve crises and advance research with efficiency that neither species could match alone. Incidents that might have escalated to violence were being diffused through combined tactical and diplomatic approaches that drew on both species' strengths. They were proving it worked, day by day, choice by choice, partnership by partnership, building foundations for cooperation that would outlast any individual relationship. Celera reviewed the latest research compilation data, showing patterns of successful integration that her scientific mind recognized as statistically significant. The program wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in ways that suggested fundamental compatibility between human and Navari capabilities when properly coordinated. Garrett entered the laboratory wearing formal insignia, marking his position as human liaison to the cooperative program. His role combined bodyguard advisor and living symbol of successful integration. His enhanced physiology had stabilized at the levels reached during his transformation, permanent changes that made him more than baseline human while keeping him fundamentally himself. "Emergency alert," he said without preamble, his enhanced perception having already processed the incoming communication. "Industrial accident in Sector 7. Chemical spill with potential cascade failure. They're requesting enhanced response team." Celera was already moving her analytical mind, cataloging necessary equipment and protocols. Chemical composition. Volatile organic compounds. Standard containment won't work. Reactions are too aggressive. They need custom neutralization synthesis, and they need it fast. "Brennan, Adelaide, you're with us." Celera called out her team, responding with practiced efficiency that came from months of coordinated operations. "Linden prep synthesis equipment for mobile deployment. We'll need pharmaceutical capacity in the field." Within minutes, they were airborne in rapid response transport, Celera coordinating with the emergency services, while Garrett provided tactical assessment. The partnership that had been born in crisis and refined through countless smaller emergencies now operated with the kind of seamless coordination that made them formidable problem solvers. At the accident site, chaos threatened to spiral toward catastrophe. Chemical reactions cascading through industrial equipment, standard protocols failing against compounds that shouldn't have been mixed, time running out before explosion or toxic dispersal threatened thousands. Celera took command with quiet authority that no one questioned anymore. "Garrett, Brennan, physical containment. I need those reaction chambers isolated before cascade reaches critical mass. Adelaide, Linden with me on synthesis. We're creating custom neutralization agents. We have 6 minutes before this goes critical." They moved as coordinated unit, each person's capabilities complementing others. Enhanced human strength, creating physical barriers that normal crews couldn't manage. Navari analytical precision, calculating exactly which compounds would interrupt cascade reactions most effectively. Partnership making impossible deadlines achievable through combined capability. 8 minutes later, the crisis was contained. Reactions neutralized. Potential catastrophe reduced to manageable industrial incident with zero casualties and minimal environmental impact. Another success story for the cooperative program. Another data point proving that integration worked better than segregation. As cleanup operations proceeded, Celera found Garrett standing at the secured perimeter's edge, looking out over the city they just protected. She moved to his side, their hands finding each other with automatic ease that 3 months of partnership had made instinctive. "You're thinking about something," she observed, reading his mood through their connection. "Just remembering where we started," Garrett replied quietly. "You assigned to find human weaknesses for the council. Me carrying guilt about failures I couldn't balance. Neither of us expecting any of this. And now," Celera prompted, "now I'm married to a brilliant alien scientist who keeps finding impossible projects to tackle together. Leading a program that's changing how entire species interact. Saving lives instead of just protecting them in the moment. And feeling like maybe all those failures before were just preparation for something that actually mattered, rather than just accumulating regrets." Celera leaned against him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "I was assigned to find humanity's weakness. Instead, I found your strength. Found our strength together. Found that the thing I was taught to fear, case unpredictability, Spontaneous connection was exactly what I needed to become something more than genetically optimized emptiness. Think we've proven it yet? Garrett asked. That cooperation works better than fear, that different species can build something stronger together than apart. I think we prove it every day, Celera replied, her patterns pulsing with contentment and determination. Every emergency we resolve, every team that follows our model, every person who watches what we've built and thinks maybe integration isn't something to fear, but something to embrace. She looked up at him, her luminescence steady and bright. The Berserker Protocol was designed to make humans into weapons. But you proved something more important, that weapons can choose to become shields. That power channeled through wisdom becomes protection instead of destruction. That strength without partnership is just violence waiting for excuse, but strength combined with intelligence becomes capability that can change worlds. Garrett pulled her close, and through their bond, Celera felt emotions echoing her own. Love that had grown from crisis into foundation. Partnership that had transformed them both. Purpose that gave meaning to capabilities that once seemed only capable of destruction or stagnation. Together, she said softly. Always, Garrett agreed. Standing there at the edge of what they'd built and what they would continue building, Celera reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd been assigned to find human weakness and instead discovered strength, theirs, hers, and what they created together when choosing cooperation over fear. The galaxy was still watching their experiment, still debating whether integration represented progress or danger. But Celera wasn't concerned about abstract philosophical debates anymore. She was too busy living the reality they'd created day by day, choice by choice, proving through action what words alone could never establish. Guardians could be stronger than weapons when they chose to protect rather than destroy. Love could transcend biology when beings were willing to embrace connection over comfortable isolation. Two people from impossible origins could build something beautiful from chaos if they were brave enough to choose partnership over perfection. And the strongest force in the universe wasn't violence or fear or genetic optimization calculated across generations. It was two beings from different worlds choosing each other, despite every reason not to, and showing everyone who watched that impossible partnerships could become foundations for impossible possibilities. 6 weeks after the Sector 7 incident, Celera sat in her office reviewing quarterly reports that documented the cooperative program's expansion when her communication console chimed with an unexpected priority message. Dr. Thena's identifier appeared on the display. Celera felt old tension resurface, her former research assistant who had threatened to report her contaminated research 3 months ago. The woman who had walked away to file formal complaints that could have destroyed everything before it began. She accepted the communication channel, keeping her expression neutral. Dr. Thena, this is unexpected. The younger scientist's patterns flickered with something that looked like shame mixed with determination. Hi, Scholar, I'm requesting a brief meeting. There's something I need to say to you directly. 20 minutes later, Thena sat across from Celera in the office that overlooked the expanded laboratory complex. Through the windows, integrated human Navari teams worked in coordination that had become routine rather than remarkable. I was wrong, Thena said without preamble, her luminescence dimmed with genuine contrition. 3 months ago, I stood in your laboratory and accused you of contaminating your research with personal involvement. I filed reports claiming you'd violated scientific objectivity and compromised your credentials through emotional attachment to your subject. She gestured toward the active laboratory. The council dismissed my complaints, not because they were protecting you, but because the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrated that your so-called contamination led to breakthrough discoveries that traditional sterile observation would never have achieved. Your willingness to experience biochemical synchronization, rather than just analyzing it from safe distance, opened entire research fields we didn't know existed. Thena met Celera's eyes directly. I've spent the past 3 months watching your program succeed beyond any reasonable projection, watching integrated teams accomplish things neither species could manage alone. And I've had to confront the reality that my complaints weren't about scientific rigor, they were about fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing the comfortable certainty that came from believing our genetic optimization represented perfection rather than stagnation. What changed? Celera asked quietly. I watched you negotiate with militants holding hostages, Thena replied. Watched you choose truth over safety. Watched Thorne demonstrate perfect restraint when using lethal force would have been easier. And I realized that everything I thought I knew about proper scientific detachment was just comfortable cowardice hiding behind professional protocols. Her patterns flickered brighter with determination. I'm requesting permission to join the cooperative program. Not in leadership capacity, I haven't earned that trust, but as a researcher willing to learn from mistakes and contribute to work that actually matters instead of maintaining safe assumptions. Celera studied her former assistant carefully, her enhanced perception reading genuine sincerity beneath the formal request. The program can always use dedicated researchers. But Thena, you need to understand this work requires willingness to question fundamental assumptions, comfort with uncertainty, acceptance that the most important discoveries often come from exactly the kind of chaos and unpredictability we were trained to suppress. I understand, Thena said simply, and I'm ready to learn. After Thena departed to begin integration into the research program, Celera stood at her office window, watching the laboratory activity with satisfaction that transcended simple professional success. This was what evolution looked like, not just in biology but in culture. People confronting their fears and choosing growth over comfortable stagnation. That evening, Celera and Garrett sat in their shared quarters reviewing the day's developments. The space they'd made together combined Navari aesthetic sensibilities with human practical comfort, a physical manifestation of partnership that honored both origins while creating something new. Thena joining the program is significant. Garrett observed his enhanced perception tracking Celera's emotional state even while she tried to maintain clinical detachment about the development. She was one of your most vocal critics. If she's willing to admit error and request integration, it suggests broader cultural shift is happening. Cultural evolution takes time, Celera replied, though her luminescence pulsed with cautious hope. One person changing their mind doesn't transform society overnight. No, Garrett agreed, but individual changes accumulate into collective transformation. That's how evolution works, incremental choices that eventually reshape entire populations. He pulled up data on his personal display. Speaking of evolution, I wanted to show you something. Research team at the medical complex has been studying the biochemical synchronization markers we documented. They've identified 3 other naturally occurring bonded pairs among the integrated teams. Pairs who weren't consciously trying to bond, but whose biochemistries synchronized through extended cooperation. Celera leaned forward, her scientific interest immediately engaged. Spontaneous pair bonding without deliberate intervention. Apparently, when humans and Navari work in close coordination over extended periods, their biochemistries start adapting to each other naturally. Not to the same degree we achieve through crisis and intensive contact, but measurable synchronization nonetheless. That has profound implications. Celera set her analytical mind racing through possibilities. If bonding can occur spontaneously through sustained cooperation, it suggests our species have latent compatibility that predates conscious awareness, as if we were designed to integrate on biological level that transcends cultural programming. Which circles back to your research question about who engineered humanity and why, Garrett said. If humans were designed with built-in compatibility for species like Navari, that suggests intentional creation of beings meant to form partnerships rather than operate in isolation. Celera pulled up the genetic data she'd been compiling sequences that had puzzled her for months. Look at this pattern in the human adaptive immune system. See how it's designed to recognize and accommodate foreign biochemistry rather than automatically rejecting it. That's not natural evolution. That's sophisticated. Engineering meant to facilitate biological integration across species boundaries. So whoever created humans wanted them to bond with other species, Garrett said slowly. Created guardians who would form partnerships rather than remaining isolated warriors. Guardians who become more effective through connection, Celera corrected. The Berserker Protocol activates in response to threats against bonded partners. Your enhancement peaked when I was endangered specifically because your enhanced perception had already categorized me as someone worth protecting at genetic level. She met his eyes with growing certainty. Garrett, I don't think the engineering was just about creating effective protectors. I think it was about creating a species that would naturally integrate with others, forming bonds that make both partners stronger. Humans weren't designed to be solitary weapons. They were designed to be adaptive partners who enhance whatever species they bond with. That would explain why human Navari teams perform so much better than either species alone, Garrett said. We're not just cooperating, we're actualizing design parameters that were built into human genetics from the beginning. Celera felt excitement building as the implications crystallized. This needs to be documented, presented to the Council. If we can prove that human enhancement naturally synergizes with Navari capabilities because of intentional genetic design, it changes the entire framework for understanding integration. It also raises bigger questions, Garrett observed. Who were the engineers? Where are they now? And what was their ultimate purpose in creating a species designed for cross-species partnership? Questions we may never fully answer, Celera admitted, but that doesn't change the practical reality. Humans and Navari work better together than apart. Whether that's accident of evolution or intentional design, the evidence is overwhelming. Their conversation was interrupted by emergency alert chiming through the quarter's communication system. Celera activated the display to find Corin's face showing unusual stress despite his professional composure. High Scholar Thorne, we have a situation requiring your immediate attention. There's been an incident in the outer settlements. Human colony reporting aggressive contact with unknown species. Casualties on both sides. They're requesting enhanced response team with diplomatic capabilities. Celera and Garrett exchanged glances that communicated volumes through their bond. Unknown species meant first contact scenario. Casualties meant violence had already occurred. Diplomatic capabilities meant someone needed to de-escalate before situations spiraled into interspecies conflict. How long until we can deploy? Celera asked, already moving to gather necessary equipment. Transport ready in 15 minutes. But High Scholar, this is outside normal program parameters. Unknown species means unknown biochemistry, unknown cultural norms, unknown threat assessment. You'd be operating without established protocols. Which is exactly why we need to go, Celera replied. The program's entire mandate is proving that human-Navari cooperation can handle situations neither species could manage alone. If we shy away from difficult scenarios, we prove our critics right about limitations. I'm authorizing the deployment, Corin said after brief hesitation. But understand that you'll be representing more than just the program. First contact with unknown species while demonstrating integrated capability, the galaxy will be watching this closely. 15 minutes later, they were aboard rapid transport heading toward the outer settlements. Celera used travel time to review what limited data existed about the unknown species, preliminary descriptions suggesting crystalline biology with apparent silicon-based communication through light frequency modulation rather than sound defensive aggression when approached unexpectedly. Crystalline biology means completely different biochemical framework. Celera thought aloud, her scientific mind already adapting research protocols. Nothing I know about carbon-based bonding will apply. We'll be starting from zero knowledge, which means we fall back on principles rather than specific protocols, Garrett said his tactical mind processing scenarios. Demonstrate non-aggression, establish communication, find common ground for cooperation rather than conflict. Exactly what we've been doing between humans and Navari, Celera agreed, just with even less shared biological foundation. The settlement appeared ahead showing evidence of recent violence, damaged structures, scorch marks suggesting energy weapon discharge, and in the center of the devastation, three beings unlike anything Celera had seen before. They stood approximately 3 meters tall bodies, composed of translucent crystalline structures that refracted light into rainbow patterns. No obvious sensory organs, but their surfaces pulsed with colors that shifted in response to environmental stimuli. Beautiful and alien, and utterly incomprehensible through conventional biological frameworks. They're surrounded by human and Navari security forces, Garrett observed his enhanced vision tracking weapon positions. Standoff situation, both sides armed and afraid. Then we break the standoff, Celera said with more confidence than she felt. Garrett, I need you to coordinate with security, get them to lower weapons, create space for negotiation. I'm going to approach the crystalline beings and attempt communication. Doc, we don't know if they're hostile or just defending themselves. which is why I need to approach without weapons, without aggression, offering scientific curiosity instead of fear. Salira met his eyes through their connection. Trust me. One more time. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Always. They exited the transport, Salira carrying only scanning equipment, while Garrett coordinated security forces into defensive postures that didn't present immediate threat. The crystalline being's color patterns shifted toward red spectrum as Salira approached, whether that indicated aggression or simply heightened alertness she couldn't determine. She stopped 10 meters away, activated her scanning equipment, and did something that her scientific training had never prepared her for, but that 3 months of partnership had taught her to value. She trusted her instincts over established protocols. Salira began emitting patterns of her own bioluminescence, deliberately cycling through colors at rhythms that matched what she observed in the crystalline being's displays. Not attempting direct communication, she had no idea what their colors meant, just demonstrating that she too could produce light patterns, establishing common ground however minimal. The crystalline being's pulsing slowed. Colors shifted from red toward blue spectrum. One of them, the largest, began producing patterns that almost seemed to echo Salira's display, with variations suggesting response rather than mere reflection. I think they're trying to communicate, Salira murmured into her recorder. Light frequency modulation as language. They're responding to my patterns with variations that might constitute basic exchange. She continued the visual dialogue, gradually incorporating data from her scanning equipment, molecular composition readings, energy signature analysis, biochemical, no, not biochemical, something else entirely. Silicon-based crystalline matrices that operated on principles completely foreign to carbon-based life. And yet, Salira noticed something in the scan data. The crystalline beings weren't just producing light, they were absorbing and transforming ambient energy in ways that suggested sophisticated environmental adaptation. Just as human DNA showed engineering for cross-species integration, these beings showed design parameters optimized for energy exchange with their surroundings. They're not attacking, Salira said clearly, knowing both Garrett and security forces monitored her communication. They're attempting environmental integration. That's why they came into the settlement. They need energy sources that their home environment doesn't provide. The violence happened because we interpreted their approach as aggression instead of necessity. She adjusted her scanning equipment, modifying it to emit specific energy frequencies that her analysis suggested the crystalline beings required. The effect was immediate. Their color patterns brightened, noticeably pulsing with what looked unmistakably like relief or gratitude. Over the next hour, Salira managed basic communication protocol. All not true language yet, but enough exchange of light patterns and energy signatures to establish mutual understanding. The crystalline beings weren't hostile. They were refugees seeking resources their failing ecosystem no longer provided. The settlement attack had been defensive response when frightened colonists opened fire first. We can help them, Salira announced to the assembled security forces. Set up energy transfer equipment that provides what they need. In exchange, preliminary scans suggest their crystalline structures have properties that could revolutionize our energy storage technology. This doesn't have to be conflict. This can be cooperation that benefits all three species. Garrett moved to her side as the security situation de-escalated into diplomatic coordination. You did it again, he said quietly. Chose understanding over fear, partnership over conflict. We did it together, Salira corrected. You kept security forces from escalating into violence while I established communication. Neither of us could have managed this alone. Through their bond, she felt his satisfaction matching her own. Another crisis resolved through cooperation. Another species discovering that integration offered better outcomes than isolation. Another data point proving their thesis about partnership transcending biology. The settlement incident established the cooperative program's reputation beyond human-Navari relations. Within weeks, the Council received requests from 3 other species interested in integration partnerships. Within months, the program had expanded to include crystalline beings, aquatic Cetari, and silicon composite Threnodi, each species offering unique capabilities that complemented others' strengths. Salira found herself directing an operation that had grown far beyond its original scope, no longer just proving human-Navari cooperation worked, but demonstrating universal principles of integration that applied across biological boundaries. One evening, 6 months after the council chamber incident, she stood on the observation deck overlooking the expanded research complex. Below, integrated teams representing 5 species worked in coordination that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Humans providing enhanced physical capability. Navari offering analytical precision. Crystalline beings contributing energy manipulation. Satari bringing bioaquatic expertise. Threnody adding computational processing that made artificial intelligence seem primitive. Together, they were accomplishing things no single species could imagine alone. Garrett joined her at the viewport, his presence immediately registering through their bond before he physically arrived. 6 months of synchronization had deepened their connection to levels that made Celera's initial biochemical data seem primitive by comparison. Elder Misha wants to speak with us tomorrow, he said without preamble. Something about long-term planning for the program's future. Any indication of the specific topic? Just that it's important enough to warrant private meeting rather than formal council session. They stood in comfortable silence watching the laboratory activity below. Celera reflected on how much had changed in half a year. From forbidden research and militant attacks to recognized program leading galactic integration efforts. From scientist afraid of chaos to director embracing uncertainty as catalyst for discovery. Do you ever regret it? Garrett asked quietly. Taking that assignment to find human weaknesses. Everything that came after. Celera considered the question seriously, her scientific mind evaluating the path that had brought them here. I regret that the council lied for 30 years about human genetics. I regret that extremists staged violence trying to prevent integration. I regret every moment of fear and uncertainty that could have been avoided through transparency. She turned to face him fully. But do I regret meeting you, bonding with you, building this program that's changing how species interact across the galaxy? Not for a single moment. Sometimes the most important discoveries come through paths we would never consciously choose. The chaos I was taught to avoid became the catalyst for everything meaningful I've accomplished. Scientific way of saying you love me, Garrett asked with slight smile. Scientific way of saying I choose you, Celera corrected gently. Every day, despite the complications, despite the scrutiny, despite every reason my conditioning tells me that bonding with an alien should feel wrong. I choose partnership over perfection, evolution over stagnation, you over comfortable certainty. Garrett pulled her close, their bond humming with synchronized contentment that no longer surprised either of them. Then I guess we're both choosing chaos over optimization, building something new instead of maintaining something safe. Together, Celera confirmed. Always, Garrett agreed. The next morning, they met Elder Misha in her private chamber's informal space that suggested personal conversation rather than official business. The elderly council member looked older than Celera remembered, the stress of the past months, evident in the dimness of her patterns despite her formal composure. Thank you both for coming. Misha began gesturing them to comfortable seating. What I'm about to discuss isn't official council business yet, but it will be soon, and I wanted you to hear it from me first. She activated a holographic display showing program statistics that Celera recognized as her own quarterly reports. Your cooperative program has exceeded every projection, not just in research output or crisis response capability, but in changing fundamental attitudes about cross-species integration. Public approval has reached 71%. Other species are requesting partnership frameworks. Even conservative factions that opposed your work initially are beginning to acknowledge the evidence. That's encouraging, Celera said carefully, sensing there was more. It is, Misha agreed. Which is why the Council is considering a proposal that would fundamentally reshape galactic governance structures. We're discussing creation of an integration council, a separate governing body composed of representatives from all partner species operating alongside traditional single-species councils, but with authority over cross-species initiatives. Celera felt her hearts accelerate. That would be unprecedented. Exactly, and the proposal includes designation of you and Thorne as founding co-directors. You would maintain your current research program while also establishing the political and administrative frameworks for multi-species governance. Garrett spoke for the first time. That's more than scientific research. That's fundamentally restructuring how galactic civilization operates. Yes, Misha said simply, because what you've proven isn't just that cooperation works in limited contexts. You've demonstrated that integration offers better outcomes than segregation across every domain we've tested. Medical research, emergency response, diplomatic negotiation. Even basic governance shows improvement when multiple perspectives combine rather than operating in isolation. She leaned forward, her patterns intensifying with conviction. Celera Garrett, you started this by choosing truth over comfortable lies, by choosing partnership over safe isolation. Now you have the opportunity to institutionalize those choices at civilizational scale, to make integration the default framework rather than experimental exception. The opposition will be fierce, Celera observed. Not everyone has accepted the evidence. Many still fear what integration represents for traditional cultural identity. Opposition is inevitable with any significant change, Maisha acknowledged. But you've already survived militant attacks, political opposition, and public scrutiny. You've proven that integrated approaches produce superior results. The question is whether you're willing to expand from proving the concept to implementing it at scale. Celera looked at Garrett, felt his thoughts through their bond, excitement mixed with trepidation, recognition that this was bigger than either of them had imagined, understanding that accepting would mean transforming their entire lives again just when things had started stabilizing. We need time to discuss this, Celera said finally. The implications are enormous. Take the time you need, Misha replied, but understand that the galaxy is watching. What you decide won't just affect your own futures, it will shape the trajectory of multi-species civilization for generations to come. After leaving Misha's chambers, Celera and Garrett walked through the research complex in contemplative silence. They found themselves on the same observation deck where they'd stood the previous evening, looking down at integrated teams whose existence proved their foundational thesis. "Do you want this?" Garrett asked quietly. "The political role, institutional authority, responsibility for implementing integration at civilizational scale." "I'm a scientist," Celera replied. "I wanted to do good research and pursue truth wherever it led. I never imagined becoming a political figure or institutional administrator." That's not answering the question. Celera was quiet for a long moment, watching the laboratory activity while her analytical mind processed implications. "I don't want the attention or scrutiny that comes with high-profile leadership. I don't want the political maneuvering or compromise required for institutional governance. What I want is to continue proving that integration works, that cooperation transcends biology, that beings from impossible origins can build impossible partnerships." She turned to face Garrett directly. "But if accepting this position means we can implement those principles at scale, rather than just demonstrating them in controlled environments, if we can make integration the default framework instead of experimental exception, then yes, I want that, even with all the complications it brings." "Then we accept," Garrett said simply. "Together we build something bigger than ourselves, bigger than what either of us could accomplish alone. That's what partnership means, combining capabilities to achieve what would be impossible in isolation." Through the chayim, Celera felt his certainty and support, felt how his enhanced perception had already calculated the challenges ahead and committed to facing them together. "You realize this changes everything again," she said. "Just when we'd found stability." "Stability is overrated," Garrett replied with a slight smile. "You taught me that. Evolution requires disruption. Growth demands discomfort. Building something new means leaving comfort behind." "Scientific way of saying you're choosing chaos?" Celera asked, echoing their earlier conversation. "Scientific way of saying I choose you," Garrett corrected gently. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. Building partnership at personal scale taught us principles that apply at civilizational scale. Now we just implement what we've already proven works." They stood together, watching the complex below, feeling the weight of choice and the excitement of possibility. From forbidden research to recognized program to foundational institution for galactic governance, the path had been anything but predictable. But looking at this impossible human who had transformed her understanding of courage and partnership, Celera felt certainty crystallized despite the uncertainty ahead. Together they would build something that transcended individual achievement. Together, they would prove that integration offered better futures than segregation. Together, they would show the galaxy that the strongest foundations came from beings brave enough to choose connection over comfortable isolation. She squeezed Garrett's hand, their bond humming with synchronized purpose. Together, she confirmed. Always, Garrett agreed. And standing there overlooking everything they'd built from chaos and crisis, Celera knew that whatever challenges the future brought, they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else. As partners, as equals, as proof that impossible connections could become foundations for impossible possibilities. The galaxy was watching. The future was uncertain. The challenges would be enormous. But together, human and Navari Guardian and scientist partners, in ways that transcended biology and culture, and everything either species thought they knew about limits of cooperation, they were ready to show everyone what integration could accomplish when beings chose evolution over stagnation. One partnership at a time, one crisis resolved through cooperation. One impossible connection proving that the future belonged to those brave enough to build it together, rather than hiding in comfortable isolation. This was what evolution looked like. Not perfect, not optimized, just real beings making real choices to build something better than what came before. Together, always together.